The afternoon sun slanted through the wide kitchen window of the ranch house, spilling light over the wooden floor where Mary stood with her apron tied tight around her thick waist. The scent of stew filled the air, heavy with herbs and meat, and the low cry of a baby echoed from the room down the hall. She hesitated before stirring the pot again, her hands trembling slightly. It had been 3 days since she started working there, 3 days since she'd come to cook and clean for the widowed rancher everyone in town spoke about in hushed tones. James Walker. The man who lost his wife in childbirth, the one who never spoke more than a few words, and the one whose house stood like a fortress on the edge of the valley. Mary didn't expect kindness. She wasn't used to it. Her last job at the town diner ended with snickers behind her back, girls whispering about her size, men laughing when she turned around. But here, there were no whispers. Only silence. Until the baby cried again. She turned off the stove and wiped her hands. Her heart pounded as she walked toward the nursery, unsure if she should even step inside. But when she peered through the half-open door, she saw him, James, standing stiffly beside the crib, holding his wailing son with the awkwardness of a man who didn't know how to touch something so small without breaking it. "Sir," she said softly, "would you like me to?" He turned, his tired eyes landing on her. "You cook," he said simply. "You don't tend to the baby." "Yes, sir," she murmured, bowing her head. But when the infant's cries rose higher, something inside her ached. It was the same sound her sister's baby made before she died, hungry, desperate, alone. She bit her lip, watching as James tried to rock the child, his face tight with frustration. "I can help," she whispered finally. "If you'll let me." He looked at her, studying the roundness of her face, the soft curve of her arms. His wife had been slim, delicate, everything this woman was not. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, with a sigh, he handed the baby over. Mary's large, warm hands cradled the infant with instinct. She hummed quietly, her deep voice trembling like a lullaby. Within moments, the crying softened, and the baby's head rested against her chest. James stood frozen, watching. Something in the sight, this big, gentle woman holding his child, stirred something raw and unfamiliar inside him. She looked up timidly. "Sir, I can nurse him if you want. My sister passed not long ago. I cared for her baby until he didn't make it. My milk's still." She hesitated, her cheeks flushing with shame. "No one wants a fat girl, sir," she said quietly, "but I can nurse the baby." James's breath caught. The room was silent except for the baby's soft breathing. He didn't answer for a long time. The pain of his loss still pressed against his chest like a stone, and the thought of another woman in his wife's place felt like betrayal. But there was something undeniable in her tenderness, something his grief couldn't reject. "Then stay," he said finally, his voice hoarse. "Stay, Mary." She blinked in surprise. "Sir." He nodded once. "You'll look after him. And cook. That's all." Mary nodded quickly, her heart swelling and breaking all at once. "Yes, sir." The days that followed passed quietly. Mary worked from dawn till dark, scrubbing, cooking, rocking the baby through the long, restless nights. James rarely spoke, but she often felt his gaze linger on her when he thought she wasn't looking. Once, she caught him standing in the doorway while she sang to the baby, her voice low and soft. She froze, unsure whether to stop, but he just said, "Keep singing," and left. Weeks turned into months. The baby, Samuel, began to laugh whenever Mary entered the room, his chubby hands reaching for her. The house that had once been filled with silence now carried the faint hum of life again, music, warmth, something almost like hope. One evening, as she cleared the table after supper, James spoke suddenly. "You never sit to eat," he said. Mary looked startled. I eat in the kitchen, sir." "It's fine." "It's not," he said firmly. "Sit." She hesitated, unsure. But when he gestured to the chair across from him, she obeyed, hands nervously folded in her lap. The firelight flickered across her face, softening her features. James studied her for a moment. "You've done more for this house than anyone since," he stopped. The name of his late wife hung unspoken in the air. "I don't say much, but I notice." Mary looked down, blinking back tears. "It's nothing, sir. I'm just grateful to be useful." He leaned back, his gaze steady. "You're more than useful, Mary." She didn't know how to answer. No one had ever said words like that to her, not with that kind of weight behind them. Later that night, after putting Samuel to sleep, she stepped outside for air. The moonlight painted the field silver, and she closed her eyes, breathing it in. For the first time in years, she felt something like peace. Behind her, the door creaked open. James stepped out, his hat in his hand. "You should rest," he said quietly. "I will," she replied. He hesitated, then added, "You remind me of someone who cares too much. Even when she's been hurt." Mary smiled faintly. "Caring's all I know, sir." James looked away, jaw tight. "You don't have to call me, sir." "Not anymore." She froze. "Then what should I call you?" "James," he said softly. "Just James." The wind carried their silence, and something shifted between them, something fragile but real. Days turned into weeks again. James began to join her in the kitchen, helping chop vegetables, listening to her hum. Sometimes he'd even laugh, a sound that startled both of them. He still missed his wife, but now, when he looked at Mary, it wasn't pain that filled his chest. It was something gentler, warmer. One night, Samuel fell ill with fever. Mary stayed awake for hours, cooling his forehead, whispering prayers. When James entered and saw her rocking the baby with tears streaking her cheeks, he knelt beside her. "He'll be fine," he whispered. "You've got him." She shook her head, sobbing. "I can't lose another one. Please, God, not this one." James reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "You won't. I promise." When the baby's fever finally broke at dawn, Mary slumped forward in exhaustion, and James caught her before she fell. She didn't even realize she was leaning against him until his hand brushed her hair back gently. "Rest," he said softly. "You've done enough." But he didn't move away. And she didn't either. By spring, everyone in town had started talking again. The fat cook who stayed too long at the widower's ranch, the whispers of impropriety. But James didn't care. Neither did Mary. One evening, as the sky bled gold over the hills, James came in from the barn and found her sitting with Samuel on her lap, humming the same song she'd sung that first night. He stood for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've given this house a mother again." Mary blinked, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't mean to take her place." He stepped closer, kneeling beside her. "You didn't," he said. "You made your own." The baby gurgled, clutching at Mary's hair. James smiled faintly. "He loves you," he said. Mary looked down, her voice trembling. "And you?" He hesitated, then reached for her hand. "I do too," he said simply. "Stay, Mary. Not as the cook. Not as the nurse. Just, stay." For a moment, the world was still. Then she nodded, her tears falling onto the baby's tiny fingers. "I'll stay," she whispered. And in that quiet ranch house, once cold, once hollow, the sound of love began again. The morning after he said those words, the world felt different, so subtle yet so certain that Mary could feel it in the quiet hum of the wind that slipped through the kitchen window. The air smelled of coffee and hay, the faint scent of rain drifting from the horizon. James was already outside, tending to the horses. She could hear the rhythmic creak of the barn door and the muffled sounds of hooves against dirt. Mary moved through the kitchen like she always did, but something in her chest stirred restlessly. Every glance at the door made her pulse quicken, every breath carried the weight of what had been said and the uncertainty of what might come next. She'd never known what it was like to be wanted, not truly, not beyond her use. Back in town, men would smirk when she passed, their laughter sharp as broken glass. Women whispered about her, pitying her plainness, her soft body, her quiet voice. Even her own kin had once said, "Mary, you'll never be a wife. You're too big, too gentle, too invisible." But here, on this ranch, with a man who hardly smiled yet spoke truth like it was gospel, she felt seen. Not mocked, not used, seen. When James came in that morning, his hands were dirty from the stables, his shirt clinging to his chest from the work. He set his gloves on the table, his eyes briefly meeting hers. There was a flicker there, something unspoken, something neither of them knew how to name. "Breakfast smells good," he said, voice low. "Biscuits and eggs," she murmured, placing a plate in front of him. "Samuel's still sleeping." He nodded, taking a seat. "He's been sleeping better since you started singing at night." Mary paused, surprised that he'd noticed. "He seems to like it." "I think it's more than that," James replied quietly. "You make him feel safe." Her cheeks flushed. "Thank you, James." He didn't respond immediately. He just watched her pour his coffee, her hands trembling slightly. Then, with a small nod, he said, "You should sit." Mary hesitated before obeying. They ate in silence for a while, the kind that was comfortable but heavy with something neither dared disturb. Outside, the wind rustled the fields, and inside, the clink of cutlery was the only sound. When the meal ended, Mary stood to clear the plates, but James stopped her. "Leave them," he said. "You work too much." She smiled faintly. "I don't mind work. Work keeps me steady." He leaned back, studying her face. "You ever had anything that wasn't work?" Mary froze. The question hit deeper than he knew. "No," she said finally. "Work's all that ever wanted me back." James looked at her for a long time, something in his expression softening. "It's wanting you now," he murmured, half to himself. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't need to. That afternoon, rain began to fall, a slow drizzle that soaked the fields and blurred the hills. Mary spent the hours by the fire, mending clothes and watching Samuel crawl across the rug. His laughter filled the quiet room, a sound that never failed to melt her heart. James came in dripping wet, his hat tilted low over his brow. "Storm's rolling in," he said, removing his coat. "I brought in the horses, but the fence on the north side's loose. I'll fix it after the rain." "You'll catch cold if you go back out there," Mary said, her voice firm. "Sit. Warm up first." He hesitated, then obeyed, sitting by the fire while she fetched a towel. She began drying his hair, her fingers brushing his temple. The closeness made her chest tighten. His breath hitched once but he didn't pull away. "You don't have to fuss over me," he said softly. She smiled. "Maybe I want to." He turned his head slightly, meeting her gaze. The air between them thickened with a quiet electricity neither had planned for. Mary's hand stilled, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The crackle of the fire, the faint rhythm of rain, the shared warmth of something dangerously tender. James swallowed hard and looked away. "You'll spoil me," he murmured. She laughed quietly, stepping back. "You could use a little spoiling, I think." That night, when Samuel cried again, it wasn't hunger or fear, it was the thunder that woke him. Mary rushed in, scooping him into her arms, murmuring softly against his tiny ear. She didn't see James standing in the doorway, shirt half buttoned, his eyes full of quiet admiration. He watched her until the baby drifted back to sleep, and when she turned, startled to find him there, he whispered, "You're good with him." Mary blushed. "He's easy to love. So are you," he said before he could stop himself. Her breath caught. He looked as startled by his own words as she was. "James," she began, but he stepped closer. "You've brought life back here, Mary." To him. To me. Her eyes glistened in the dim light. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," he whispered. "Just stay like you promised." She nodded slowly. "I will." After that night, something unspoken lived between them, a quiet understanding, a warmth that didn't need words. Mary found herself laughing more. James started joining her in the kitchen more often, sometimes helping, sometimes just watching her move, as though her presence made the house breathe again. One afternoon, while she was hanging laundry in the sun, James came out with Samuel on his hip. The baby squealed when he saw her, and Mary reached out, tickling his chin. "Looks like he's got your smile," she said gently. James chuckled. "He's got your laugh." They both froze at that, realizing how natural the words had sounded. For a moment, neither looked away. Then James said, "You ever think about having children, Mary?" Her eyes lowered. "Once. Long ago. But men never saw me as someone to marry. They were fools," he said simply. She glanced up, her heart stuttering. "You don't mean that." "I do," he said. "A man would be lucky to have someone like you. Someone who loves without expecting anything in return." She turned away before he could see the tears forming. "You shouldn't say things you don't mean." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And what if I do mean them?" The wind rustled the sheets between them, and Mary's breath came shaky. "Then I'd say you're kinder than I deserve." He shook his head. "You deserve more than kindness." The rest of the day passed in a blur. That night, Mary sat by the fire after putting Samuel to bed. She could still feel James's words lingering like a ghost in the air. Her heart wanted to believe them, but her mind whispered all the old truths she'd lived by. That love wasn't meant for her, that she was just a shadow in someone else's story. James entered quietly, 2 cups in hand. "Coffee," he said, handing her one. She took it with a grateful smile. You make it too strong. He smirked. You complain every time, yet you drink it all. They sat in silence for a while, the warmth of the fire casting golden light across their faces. Mary, he said finally, voice low, when I lost her, my wife, I thought I'd buried my heart with her. I didn't think I could ever care again. Mary stared into the flames. You don't have to explain, James. I want to, he insisted. Because somehow, you came here with your quiet voice and your kind hands, and suddenly, the house isn't just walls anymore. It feels alive. You made it that way. Her throat tightened. I didn't mean to change anything. You did, he said. And I'm glad you did. He reached out, his hand brushing hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, James, people talk. They already whisper about me. Let them, he said firmly. They don't know what this means. And what does it mean? She asked, her heart trembling in her chest. He looked into her eyes. It means I don't want to live another day without you here. Not as the cook. Not as the nurse. As you. Mary's eyes filled with tears. You don't know what you're asking. I do, he said. I'm asking you to be part of this family. She covered her mouth, overwhelmed. James, I'm not like her. I'm not graceful or delicate. I'm just. Enough, he interrupted gently. You're Mary. That's all I've ever needed. The tears finally fell, and he pulled her into his arms. She melted against him, her sobs quiet against his chest. For the first time in years, she didn't feel heavy or unwanted, she felt held. The days that followed were golden. They worked side by side, laughed together, and built a rhythm that felt like life reborn. Samuel began calling her, Ma, his tiny voice bursting with innocence that made her heart ache. At first, she tried to correct him, but James stopped her. If he sees you that way, he said, it's because you already are. Still, not everyone approved. The town whispered louder now. The preacher's wife made comments about keeping up appearances, and the store clerk eyed her with thinly veiled disdain whenever she came into town. One afternoon, Mary overheard two women outside the general store. Can you believe it? One said. That Walker man took in that big cook as his wife. A widower and a woman like her, it's shameful. She's nothing like his first wife, the other murmured. The poor man must be desperate. Mary's hands shook as she paid for the flour, her eyes fixed on the counter. She said nothing, but the words burned like acid in her chest. When she got home, she didn't smile as she usually did. James noticed immediately. What happened? He asked. Nothing, she said too quickly. He set down his tools and crossed to her. Mary. Her voice cracked. They talk, James. They say I'm not good enough for you. That I'm only here because you pitied me. James's jaw tightened. You listen to them. I try not to, but it's hard. He took her face in his hands, his voice firm but gentle. You listen to me instead. You belong here. You belong with us. You've made this place a home again, and I don't care what anyone in that town says. Let them talk. Let them rot in their gossip. You and me, we'll raise Samuel and live our lives, and one day, those same people will realize what love really looks like. Mary's tears fell silently, and she nodded, clinging to his words. From then on, she walked taller. She smiled when she went into town, spoke kindly even when people sneered. Slowly, some of the looks softened. People began to see what James had always known, that love wasn't about appearances. By the next spring, they married quietly under the oak tree behind the house. There were no guests, no grand dress, just her in a simple white shawl and him with a small sprig of lavender pinned to his coat. Samuel giggled in Mary's arms as the preacher spoke the vows, and when James kissed her, it was gentle, reverent, full of promise. After the ceremony, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn the sky to fire. James reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers. Do you remember the first thing you said to me? He asked. She laughed softly. Something about cooking stew, I think. No, he said, smiling faintly. You said, no one wants a fat girl, sir, but I can nurse the baby. Mary blushed. I was nervous. He squeezed her hand. You were wrong, you know. About what? About no one wanting you. Her eyes shimmered. You make it sound like a fairy tale. He shook his head. No, fairy tales fade. This, he gestured to the ranch, the baby, the sky. This stays. As the years rolled on, their home became a place of